Plenty of Bible stories can teach valuable lessons, but some of its prophecies are downright twisted, even by modern standards. Here are a few examples of the Bible's more chilling predictions, doomsday included. The biblical prophet Ezekiel has a somewhat complicated reputation. There's a respect that comes with being granted visions from God, but then there's the issue of the form these visions took. Just take his first vision. As told in Ezekiel 1, he looked up to the sky and found something akin to a chariot parting the clouds, and pulling that chariot, 4 figures, each with 4 faces and 4 wings and calves' feet. But that's not all. They had human hands under their wings. But the faces, well, each of the 4 had the face of a human being, and on the right side each had the face of a lion, and on the left the face of an ox. Each also had the face of an eagle.
What is that thing?
Then there are the chariot's wheels, each of which is described as, quote, a wheel intersecting a wheel, with the wheel's rims full of eyes all around. Picture it if you can. That said, the actual prophecy attributed to this vision is more positive than you might expect from the descriptions. Ezekiel was one of a number of Jewish exiles at the time, and his vision showed that God hadn't abandoned them. Ezekiel's prophecies were all, generally speaking, a bit strange. Consider his prophecy from Ezekiel 5. That specific part of the Bible usually gets mentioned because God told Ezekiel to shave off his hair and beard, then divide it into even thirds. One part was scattered to the wind, another was burned, and the third was to be hit with a sword.
That part's weird.
Those tasks were meant to illustrate God's displeasure with the people of Jerusalem at the time. Ezekiel shaving his head symbolized God rejecting Jerusalem for its sinful ways, and the destruction of the hair was meant to indicate the punishment his people would have to endure going forward. And Ezekiel got specific about what travails were ahead, writing, "Therefore in your midst parents will eat their children, and children will eat their parents." In other words, Ezekiel predicted that the coming famine would drive people to cannibalism, all as a result of divine punishment. If you're looking for some of the darkest and most violent visions in the Bible, then head straight to the end times prophecies, or to be even more specific, the prophecies regarding what happens after the end times, as well as the punishments that will supposedly be doled out.
Say your prayers. End times are here.
For non-believers, there's a bit of a waiting period between the end of the world and judgment, 1,000 years according to Revelation 20, during which Jesus would rule with other believers. After that, non-believers would be resurrected to stand trial before a judge seated on a great white throne. But, spoiler alert, the only fate awaiting them is a second final death. Oh, and that death would be met by being thrown into the lake of fire.
Burn in hell. It says burn in hell.
What's more, it doesn't really matter what a person was like in life. If they didn't believe in God, then they're consigned to burn for eternity alongside the devil. Sure, there's some support for the idea that there's a range of severity to the punishments dished out in the lake of fire, but a living death spent on fire promises to be unpleasant regardless of the details.
We're done.
Okay.
You're done. Don't appear any more foolish.
If you read Matthew 24, you'll find a prophecy that covers both a pretty grim past and an equally grim future. Generally speaking, this prophecy is given by Jesus Christ himself as he talks to some of his followers, all of whom are desperate to know when he'll return and how they'll know it. But Jesus only leaves them with unsolved mysteries, nothing near a clear answer.
I don't get it.
I don't get it either.
He does, however, give them some dark, cryptic signs. As he walks around the temple buildings, he says, "Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." Many presume this refers to the real-life destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. After that, though, he continues by saying, "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places." Violence, strife, and persecution. Not exactly the brightest future for humanity. And the part that's perhaps most disturbing? Unlike the destruction of the temple, which has been ascribed to a specific event, the same can't be said of those wars and natural disasters. This prophecy seems to predict strings of dire events to come without an end in sight. Then, just to top it all off, this prophecy ends with an uh-oh statement. All these are the beginning of birth pains. In the book of Exodus, you can find the story of the 10 plagues of Egypt, a horrific prophecy that came about due to the religious tensions that existed around the time it was written. You know the basic story. The Israelites were being oppressed by the Pharaoh of ancient Egypt, forbidden from practicing their religion. God didn't approve of the situation, and as such, he appeared to Moses to deliver a combination of prophecies and instructions. These involved cursing Egypt with more and more plagues each time the Pharaoh refused to agree to their terms. There were 10 plagues in total: blood, gnats, flies, livestock, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, firstborns, and let's not forget frogs.
What the hell?
Whoa, dude, it's raining crabs.
Even the most straightforward of the plagues were supremely unpleasant. Masses of frogs invading people's homes or locusts so completely covering the ground that they turn it black aren't the prettiest images, nor is the thought of the people of Egypt covered in awful boils. But then there are the ones that are truly disturbing, like the water in the Nile turning to blood, killing wildlife as the smell of death filled the air, or the entire country being somehow covered in supernatural darkness for 3 days. Then, of course, there's the bone-chilling description of what happens to each firstborn child. There will be loud wailing throughout Egypt, worse than there has ever been or ever will be again. Now, to be clear, the Bible doesn't predict that one day human beings are going to tap into some sort of weird, fantastical magic and become necromancers, raising zombies to do their bidding. But that's not to say that necromancy and resurrection don't appear in passages related to biblical prophecies.
Necromancy. Oh, wow. But that's hush-hush.
In Ezekiel 37, the prophet gets a visit from God, who takes him to a valley filled with dried human skeletons. It doesn't take long for God to ask whether those bodies can be brought back to life. Ezekiel had no idea, but God told him to make a prophecy to those old bones, that he, God, would be able to breathe life back into them. Upon speaking the words as he was told, Ezekiel watched as flesh and tendons spontaneously grew and knitted together. The corpses stood up and quite literally formed an undead army. If nothing else, it's definitely a little strange to imagine a biblical prophet raising an army of zombies. But despite the creepy necromancy, analyses of this verse explain that this was actually a message of hope. During Ezekiel's time, many exiles despaired of their perceived distance from God. Though it's one of the most disturbing parts of the Bible, this prophecy was likely meant to tell them that God was still nearby, and not only that, there was a better life to come. If you want to get technical, then the events of Genesis 22 arguably end in a very positive prophecy. God tells Abraham, "I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed."
This is all your land? For all of eternity.
Yeah, but apparently God forgot to tell anyone else. We're at war with someone like every other day.
Sounds great, right? Well, yes, but if you back things up, the mood gets considerably murkier. Here's the full context. God decided that it was time to test Abraham's faith, and he did so by commanding that Abraham sacrifice his only son, Isaac. And Abraham voices no qualms about either the concept of human sacrifice or the fact that it's his own son who's being killed. He takes Isaac and a few servants with him to a mountain, proceeds to lie to all of them about his true intentions, and gets as far as tying Isaac to the altar as he holds a knife in his hand.
Have you lost your mind?
God does eventually interrupt, providing a lamb for slaughter before Abraham can actually kill his son, and explains the whole thing was just a test, one Abraham passed with flying colors. Isaac wasn't hurt in the end, but it's certainly a bit twisted that the first Hebrew patriarch was so willing to perform a human sacrifice, isn't it? It's not uncommon to reference, or hear someone else reference, the wrath of God in something of a joking context.
He's Old Testament. Blood, bullets, wrath of God, that's his style.
But if you go through the Bible, it becomes clear that this isn't necessarily a laughing matter. The levels of violence and slaughter that God condones are pretty extreme. Take Jeremiah 25. The relationship between Jerusalem and God was pretty rocky on account of the people deciding to ignore God's commands. He understandably got fed up, leading to a prophecy that spoke of wrath and ruin. The verse goes like this: "I will completely destroy them and make them an object of horror and scorn, and an everlasting ruin. This whole country will become a desolate wasteland." To get specific, a divine cup of wine would make the people go mad, just as a prelude to the slaughter that would span many different nations. No one would be able to escape, pastures and farmlands would be razed and burned, and peace would be little more than a distant memory. But the single most disturbing image in this prophecy? The heaps of corpses left behind in the aftermath. The Bible reads, "At that time, those slain by the Lord will be everywhere, from one end of the earth to the other. They will not be mourned or gathered up or buried, but will be like dung lying on the ground." Plenty of people have imagined what the end of the world would look like, but the version presented in the book of Revelation is particularly harrowing.
There are dragons, there are great whores, there are prostitutes.
Taking it from the top, in Revelation 6, the prophet John was given a scroll with 7 seals. The first 4 released the fabled 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, representing conquest, war, famine, and death, all of whom were free to wreak havoc as they saw fit. As the next 2 seals were opened, John witnessed slaughter and a wide array of natural disasters. For example, the moon turned red, the stars fell, and islands were uprooted. The 7th seal releases 7 angels, each of whom was given their own trumpet, and as told in Revelation 8, each of those trumpets heralded its own disasters. Bloody hail and fire rained down, scorching the earth. The oceans turned to blood, stars fell from the sky, the sun and moon splintered, leaving the world in darkness. All pretty dire. Then the seventh trumpet led to voices from heaven screaming down amidst great storms. And that's not even the end. Revelation 16 introduced the 7 bowls of God's wrath, all of them poured over the earth by the angels, each with devastating effect. Painful sores appeared on people's skin, and they spontaneously combusted in the sun's fire. Water turned to blood, 100-pound hailstones fell from the sky, and earthquakes split the ground. Suffering and death all around, in other words. No happy ending.